Today is October 8th, 2023. It is currently 3:25 a.m. and I am up here in the wee hours of the morning recording this video. About a month ago, I reached out to Josias'S father James on Facebook. I asked James if he would be willing to be interviewed in regards to his feelings about his son Josias'S appearing in videos on the Atlanta Street Interviews YouTube channel. At the time, James was attending to some personal matters, and he told me that he would have to think about it, but that he would definitely get back to me. While waiting to hear back from James, I then reached out to Josias'S mother Alice and asked her if she would be willing to be interviewed in regards to her feelings about her son Josias'S appearing in videos on the Atlanta Street Interviews YouTube channel. Alice agreed to be interviewed, and she and I recorded 2 interviews on separate occasions where Alice expressed her feelings towards Marcus, who is the owner of the Atlanta Street Interviews YouTube channel. During our interviews, Alice said that she felt as if Marcus was exploiting her son Josias'S, and she was very upset. Alice also expressed what seemed to be contempt for Josias'S father James as well. Weeks had passed since I had reached out to James when one night I received a message from him on Facebook. James asked me what I thought of my interviews with Alice. I told James that I was neutral in the situation, but that the majority of the viewers seemed to think that Alice made a lot of excuses and that she could have done a lot more to assist Josias'S. A lot of viewers wanted to know how Alice could work such long hours at the airport if she was so disabled. A lot of viewers were saying, you know what, this is just nothing but excuses. While you're sitting up here doing interviews, at least Josias'S father has made trips to Atlanta. Why aren't you in Atlanta? A lot of viewers said that they saw Alice on Facebook posting flyers, inviting people saying, who wants to come with me wine tasting, and asking people who wanted to go to these different events in her area with her. She would post the flyers on Facebook, and then she would say, who wants to go with me here? A lot of viewers also saw Alice on TikTok making regular TikToks where she was moving and doing certain things. And so a lot of people were like, no, you are inviting people to events, you're making TikTok videos. Why aren't you in Atlanta seeing about Josias'S? Alice said that she was having some financial issues and that it would take money to get to Atlanta. She said that she doesn't have a car. She said once she gets to Atlanta, she's going to need to get a hotel room. And so a lot of people were just saying, no, Alice, you said you had family in Atlanta. Why aren't you in Atlanta trying to get Josias'S? So that's pretty much how people felt about Alice. James then called me on the phone and proceeded to tell me that it was hard for him to get through my interviews with Alice because Alice responded with lies to every question that I asked. James wanted to get his side of the story out. However, he did not want to be on camera because he just felt like the interviews that he had previously done on the Atlanta Street Interviews YouTube channel caused a lot of friction within his family, within his household, and so he didn't want to be on camera, but he did relay his story to me, and I'm about to relay to you James's side of the story exactly as he told it to me. After speaking to both of Josias'S parents, I've had several conversations with Alice. I've had about 3 conversations with James. I think that James was really sincere in relaying his story to me. Of course, I wasn't there, so I can't tell you what's truthful, what's not truthful. But after hearing everything that I'm going to tell you, I want you all to think back to my interviews with Alice. Then I want you to take into consideration James's side of the story, which I'm about to tell you right now. And then down in the comments, I would like for you all to tell me, who do you believe the most? Josias DeShawty Sharp was born on May 7th, 2003 in Huntington, West Virginia to parents James Sharp Jr. and Alice Reed. According to James, it was the early 2000s and he was attending college in Huntington, West Virginia. James told me that he would oftentimes carry around a notebook. James said that he was into music and the notebook would have like lyrics and things like that in it, and he would just always carry it around. One evening, James decided to attend a party. Before going to the party, James stopped by his cousin's house. He had his notebook with him. He spent some time at his cousin's house, and then he proceeded to the party, but he realized that he had left his notebook at his cousin's house. So instead of going to the party, he turned back around to get his notebook. When he turned back around and made it back to his cousin's house, Alice was at his cousin's house. So I'm assuming from what James told me that Alice somehow knew the people in his cousin's house. She was there. She had his notebook, and it was kind of being playful, saying, I'm not going to give you your notebook back. One thing led to another. He took Alice home. He said that they had sex, and that was that. According to James, his relationship with Alice was very casual. It was just a physical type of thing. It was never serious. James said that after he and Alice had started having sex, that Alice became a little bit possessive. She would get crazy if she saw him, talking to another girl. James said that Alice would do weird things like, he was staying with his brother and he would catch Alice outside of the door, pacing back and forth in front of his crib. And he said eventually he just let Alice come in and live with him and his brother. He said during the time that Alice was living in homeless shelters, so he allowed Alice to come live with him and his brother. And this is all during the time that he was in college. And he also said that he was working during this time. James' exact words to me were, it was a live-in smash. That's what he considered the relationship to be. He said that his relationship with Alice during that time was just a live-in smash. James then told me that one time that he and Alice were having sex, the condom broke, and that's when she became pregnant with Josias'S. Now, according to Alice, all of this is a complete lie. Alice says that it was way more than anything casual. And Alice even said, well, if it was so casual, then why did James and I move out of his brother's house and we had 3 places of our own? We had 2 apartments and 1 house. If it was that casual, then why did James propose to me in front of his entire family? Now, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but Alice has 2 sons. She has a son named Keyshawn, and then she has Josias'S. Alice got pregnant with Keyshawn when she was 14 years old, and she had him at 15 years old. According to James, at the time that he and Alice met, James claims that Keyshawn was already in foster care. I asked James why Keyshawn was in foster care, and at first James was hesitant to tell me the reason, and then he went on to say that Alice was dating a man who was dealing drugs and that Keyshawn saw something and he told, and that is why CPS intervened and placed Keyshawn into foster care. Alice claimed that James was lying. She said that Keyshawn was not in foster care. Alice never told me where Keyshawn was during the time that she met James. I don't know where Keyshawn was, but according to James, Keyshawn was already in foster care. So their stories differ greatly because according to Alice, Keyshawn did not go into foster care until she took the charge for James. That is when she says that she went to jail, James got Josias'S, and then Keyshawn went into foster care. But according to James, that's not how things went. Keyshawn was already in foster care. According to James, after allowing Alice to move in with he and his brother, he and Alice moved into 2 apartments together and then into a house together. James said that everything was always tumultuous. James says that he and Alice mainly fought because Alice wouldn't keep a clean house. He said that he would go to work. He was still in school. He would come home and there was just it would be chaos. Alice wouldn't want to stay home with Josias'S. She was always running the streets. James said that Alice was hanging with drug dealers and that she never really wanted to be home with Josias'S, and it was just causing a lot of friction within the household. James said that while Alice was pregnant with Josias'S, they had some neighbors who lived upstairs. They were a couple. James says that the woman came downstairs with a shotgun, was going to shoot Alice because she was accusing Alice of sleeping with her man who lived upstairs. I asked James if he believed if Alice was actually sleeping with the man. James said that he didn't know. He just said that he passed the man in passing, and the man looked at him and said, "It is what it is." I asked Alice about this story. She said that James is lying. She said that the reason a girl pulled a gun on her is because she broke into James' house and she caught James with a woman, and then James stuck that girl on her. So as you can see, their stories vary greatly. According to James, the woman came downstairs because Alice was messing with the man. According to Alice, it never happened that way, and that James stuck a girl on her for catching him in bed with another woman. Alice also claims that while she was pregnant with Josias, that James body slammed her, and Alice said that she thinks that Josias has some disabilities for two reasons. She says that James' side of the family has mental disabilities, and she said that in addition to that, she feels that being body slammed while she was pregnant with Josias is another reason that Josias was born with disabilities. James told a story about one day coming home and Alice and Josias was gone. He was looking for them, walking up and down the street, when a guy approached him and said, "Hey, you looking for your child? You looking for your son?" And James says, "Yeah." And he says, "Oh, he's at so-and-so's house up the street." So James goes to the house and he finds Josias, but Alice is not there. From what James is saying, Alice just dropped Josias off down the street at someone's house, and then she went carousing the streets. James said that during the time that Josias was around 8 months old, he and Alice had got into a fight. Alice was throwing canned goods at him. I think he said she was throwing peas and corn and just canned goods at him. A physical altercation ensued where James did admit to fighting Alice. He said that he was trying to get Alice up off of him, but he did put his hands on Alice. James said that after the altercation, he just was like, you know what? I don't want to be in a situation where I feel like I have to put my hands on someone. This is going too far. He said that he looked at Josias and said, "I'm going to be back." And he said that he got a bus ticket and he got on a bus and he left Huntington, West Virginia and went back home to Columbus, Ohio. According to James, once he made it back to Columbus, Ohio, his sister introduced him to a young lady named Ebony, and James and Ebony have been a couple ever since. So they've been a couple for years and years. And one thing I can tell you from talking to James is that James loves that woman. When you talk to James, the way that he speaks about Ebony, it's like he's a schoolboy or something. He can tell you exactly what day they met. He can tell you just everything, like dates, and places and events when it comes to Ebony. And so he talks about her with much respect. He says that it takes a special kind of woman to deal with what Ebony has dealt with over the years. He says that Ebony was a great role model in Josias's life, and he just could not stop speaking highly of Ebony. So one thing I do believe is that James really loves Ebony. After meeting Ebony, James and Ebony gets an apartment, a 1-bedroom. During this time, James says that he finds out that Alice is trying to put Josias up for adoption back in West Virginia. You heard me right. James says that Alice was trying to get a lady to adopt Josias back in West Virginia. During this time, James got custody of Josias. He took Josias. At this point, Josias is still a toddler. He's now with James back in Columbus, Ohio. I asked James, so did Josias live with you or did he live with your parents? James said because he and Ebony only had a 1-bedroom, on paper, they used his parents' address because his parents had a house. So they wanted the legal address to be his parents' address so that if anyone came to check on Josias, they could see that he had adequate space and adequate living conditions. But James said that although on paper Josias's address was his parents' address, that Josias went back and forth between he and Ebony's 1-bedroom and James's parents' house. James said that this went on for years until finally his parents couldn't put up with Josias. Josias was having outbursts and behavioral problems, and so that's when Josias came to live with Ebony and James. So from what James is saying, he doesn't have anything to do with Alice at this time. Alice is back in West Virginia. James is in Columbus, Ohio. He's living with Ebony and Josias. Josias is about 3 years old when James hears that Alice has gotten into trouble for fraud. Now, originally, I thought Alice told me that she took a drug charge for James. But I recently spoke to Alice and she said no, that she did not take a drug charge for James, that it was actually fraud charges. From what James is saying, Alice is making all this up. He already had Josias. He was already living with Josias and Ebony when he hears that Alice is gotten into trouble for fraud charges back in West Virginia. James told me that he has never been in any type of legal trouble in his entire life. He said that he's over 40 years old, and it wasn't until recently that he even received a traffic ticket. So from what James is saying, he never had to go and get Josias or anything because he already had Josias. Josias was already living with him. So years go by, and Josias is just living with Ebony and James. Now, I specifically asked James during this time, where did Josias think that Alice was? I said, James, Josias said that you told him that Alice was dead. Is this true? Now, James kind of skipped around this a little bit. James said that no, Josias misunderstood me. He asked me where his mother was, and I said that she's dead to me. So he just, misunderstood and thought that I said that she was dead. I said, well, did you tell Josias that Alice was in prison? James said, no, that's too much for a young child. I wasn't going to tell Josias that she was in prison. So I said, well, James, when did Josias find out about Alice? James told me that Josias didn't know anything about Alice until Josias's 14th birthday. James said that when Alice got out of jail, that Alice contacted James's mother, and that they all thought it would be a great thing if they surprised Josias with his mother on his 14th birthday. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When I heard that, I was like, what were y'all thinking? What were all of y'all thinking? This boy doesn't even know that his mother exists, and y'all think that it's a great idea just to have her show up out of the blue on his 14th birthday like, surprise, I'm your mother. Based on what James said, that's what happened. And also based on what Alice said, that's what happened. So this whole time, Josias is living with Ebony and James. Josias really doesn't have a clear understanding of where his mother is. He's assuming that she's dead. And on his 14th birthday, both of his parents surprise him by having Alice show up to his 14th birthday party. James says that after the birthday, he would allow Josias to go and visit his mother, and it seems as if every time Josias came back from his mother's house, that Josias's attitude would be completely different, and he was becoming more and more rebellious. James claims that Alice would threaten Josias by saying things like, if you don't come over here and if you don't live with me, then you're no longer going to be able to see your big brother and your nephew. James claims that Alice kidnapped Josias twice during these visits. James said that the second time was the worst. During this incident, James claims that Alice abducted Josias and took him to Michigan and had Josias living out of trap houses. James claims that Alice would tell Josias to stay in these abandoned trap houses all day, not to go anywhere while she goes out running the streets. James claims that Josias then tried to commit suicide, which landed Josias in some type of mental institution. When James found out that Josias was in the institution, he had to leave Columbus, Ohio, and go to Michigan to check Josias out of the mental facility. I asked James, I said, James, if Alice abducted Josias twice, why wasn't she placed in jail? James told me that she wasn't placed in jail because Ohio favors the mother and that nothing was done about Alice taking Josias out of state. James says that CPS had never been a part of he and Josias' life prior to Alice coming home from prison. After Alice came home from prison, James said that Alice would make fake reports to CPS, and she would also try to brainwash Josias by telling him different things. And because Josias was so easily influenced, he just went along with whatever Alice was saying. After that, CPS became involved. CPS began making monthly visits to James's house. Josias seems to be playing both sides. Whenever he doesn't want to follow James and Ebony's rules, then he sides with his mom. And so it's just an ongoing thing in the courts at this point. Now, Alice provided me some court documents, and I read through all of the documents. There was lots of allegations of abuse. Josias claimed that he was beat with hangers by James, that James would punch him with his fist. There was an incident where Josias and Ebony pulled knives on each other, and Josias even accused Ebony of sexual abuse. Again, according to James, none of these allegations took place prior to Alice coming home. As I read through the court documents, it was clear to me that the courts were aware that Josias sometimes made things up. As I was reading through the documents, I saw where a therapist was sitting down talking to Josias, and Josias wasn't being cooperative. Josias was just kind of saying anything. So the courts were aware that Josias had all types of issues and would just kind of go along with anything. At some point, the courts felt as if Josias needed more psychiatric care than James could provide. And so they removed Josias and put him into a program where they could watch over him and treat his mental condition until they could determine which parent Josias should be placed with. Now, I read the court documents, and the court documents said that Josias either wanted to be placed with his mother or in an independent living program. According to James, Josias stayed in the program for a while, and then he was released back into his custody. James claims that Josias stayed with him and Ebony until Josias turned 18, at which time Josias decided to go live with his mother. There was nothing that James could do about it because Josias was of age, so Josias moves out of Ebony and James's house and goes to live with his mother. James says that it was during this time that Alice started receiving Josias's SSI check. Alice moved Josias to Atlanta. Josias still had behavioral problems, so he didn't want to listen. He got mixed up with the wrong crowd. He got on drugs. Alice decides to leave Atlanta, but Josias does not want to leave with her. So Josias remains in Atlanta on drugs and becomes homeless. That is how Josias ended up on Atlanta Street Interviews YouTube channel. James says until this day that Josias gets $90 taken out of his SSI check as a penalty for when Alice was still receiving his check after she had left Atlanta. James' parents had to contact SSI and have them stop issuing the check to Alice, and that is when James's parents, which is Josias' grandparents, started receiving his SSI check every month. Currently, Josias is back in Columbus, Ohio. Because of everything that Josias has said about Ebony, he cannot live in the house with Ebony and James. Also, Josias' grandparents does not want him to live with them, so Josias is currently in a homeless shelter. James has Josias' dog Batman. James tries to see Josias every single day. James says that Josias is still being Josias. Since he's been back in Ohio, he's had 2 girlfriends, and currently Josias lives in between the second girlfriend and the homeless shelter. So you can only be at the homeless shelter for certain hours. So when Josias is not at the homeless shelter, he's with the new girlfriend. Now, James has said that Josias is doing much better because he can tell that he's not on drugs anymore and he's more of his normal self. I spoke to Alice, and Alice also said that Josias is a lot more coherent now that he is not on drugs. James says that the place that Josias is staying is currently trying to assist Josias get his own apartment. And as far as James himself, James is planning on starting a YouTube channel that is going to be focused on assisting homeless people in his area. As far as Alice is concerned, she is currently living 8 hours away in North Carolina. She still hasn't seen Josias, but earlier today I spoke to Alice and she said that Josias has been calling her. He sounds really good, but she said that he has been asking her for money. As far as how James felt about Marcus from Atlanta Street Interviews, James appreciated the little things that Marcus would do for Josias, but James also told me that he felt that a lot of things could have been handled a lot differently. For example, James really did not like the fact that Marcus was asking Josias about his stepmother. James said that when Marcus made that video and Josias was saying that he wanted to sleep with his stepmother, man, James said that that caused so much chaos in his household and that he actually told Marcus this. So although James felt like in some instances, he appreciated the little things that Marcus was doing for Josias, there was a couple of incidents where James felt that Marcus could have handled things a lot differently. So you all, that is it. You have heard James's side of the story as he related to me. Again, I would like for you all to jump down in that comment section and to let me know what you think about everything that I just told you. Until the next video, love on your friends, your family members, and remain safe. And with that being said, I'm out.